Welcome to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson and I ask my guests one simple question. Why? Focusing on the importance of why, I share with you the relatable, uplifting and inspiring conversations I have with people from all walks of life. This podcast will encourage you to focus on your why to enable and empower you to achieve the success you desire. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Welcome to the Focus on Why podcast, Lucia Knight.
Hey Amy, I'm delighted to be here. Can't wait for this. I've been looking forward to it.
Oh, me too. It's been great. I've introduced your colleagues. They've been on the podcast and now I feel that you need to be heard as well.
Well, I may not be as entertaining, but I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, well, I'm sure you will do. Your job is intriguing me because you describe yourself as a career satisfaction designer. Wow. Now, I need to know a bit more about that, as I'm sure the audience does too. Explain.
So, career satisfaction designer. I spent ages trying to come up with just a quick, short, sharp title for myself that wasn't limiting, but didn't say I ran the world. You know, the world is my desk and I'm in charge of it. But career satisfaction, I spent 20 years as a headhunter and in recruitment in the UK and in Australia. And I counted, it's not an exact number, but I estimated on averages that I've interviewed 3,000 people over the course of my 20-year career. So, towards the end, I was interviewing a lot more senior people, so for the last 10 years, mostly people will be in their 40s or 50s or possibly late 50s. But all of those people had issues, I guess, with work satisfaction. They just wanted more of it and couldn't figure out how to get more of it. And I guess psychologists call happiness life satisfaction. And I love that there's a way to measure happiness. It's just in life satisfaction. And so I think the world will be a better place. Oh dear, the world will be a better place if more people did work that was satisfying. So the second part of my title is designer. So I use like an engineering design philosophy so that once people are ready to design the next stage of their career, we start with identifying the problem and we move on to solutions. And it's a really very clear design process. And I think that's a different way to do it than anybody else in the world.
So this is really interesting because you are headhunting people. So some people would have been receptive to those calls and some people would have sort of blocked them. Of the people that sort of blocked them, did they eventually come around when they realised that perhaps they might not have been as happy and might not have had that life satisfaction that you were providing for them alternatively?
I didn't mind if people, I always had conversations. If they didn't want to engage, that's completely fine. But if someone taps you on the shoulder and says, I have this interesting position and this interesting business, and they want someone like you, I was always curious to why people wouldn't take that call. Why wouldn't you have a 10-minute call with someone if there was a possibility that you might enjoy something more? So I don't really know what's going on with the individuals who decided to not take the call. And I'm assuming that they were very happy as they were.
Okay. I used to work in recruitment, but not in the headhunting space. I used to have temps working. So people were volunteering to come to me, but I did have to speak to companies to obviously sell them the services. So I also had that 10 minutes, why wouldn't you be curious? But yeah, I guess if you added up all of those 10 minutes of people calling, it does add up in your day. So.
And look, one of the most interesting skills that I help people with is to say no. So I think, as you say, if you had 10 calls of 10 minutes every day, you've got no time to do valuable work. So yeah. I got that.
So life satisfaction, you mentioned that's what psychologists call happiness, or they've got a way of breaking it down. Can you explain a bit more about that?
We could go into lots of psychological detail, but I think that the essence of it is that we choose our level of happiness. Yeah, and that only when we choose that this moment, this exact moment in this second, are we feeling satisfied and fulfilled with our lot, which has a lot to do with gratitude. Can we start a journey to increasing that? Also, I guess people are always seeking something in the future. I'll be happy when I become a finance director, or I'll be happy when I've paid off the mortgage, or I'll be happy when, and that as a concept to psychologists is just crazy, because happiness is an idea. It's an idea in our head, and we can choose it right now. So in my work, I try to get people to understand what they have that's very specifically and uniquely theirs. And I call this superpowers. So the first thing we do is we find their superpowers, because only when you use your superpowers, which are your uber strengths that are deeply connected to your pleasure sensors, can you do joyful work. So lots of people that I come across who've been promoted up the ladder, up the corporate ladder in their career, they actually move further and further away from their superpowers. And I don't think, I'd be interested to hear what you think about this, but I don't think that people management is natural for most individuals, for most humans. So if it's a skill that they want to learn, then they can become great at it. But I see so many people who are at the top of some corporate tree who are actually just moving pieces around the board and aren't using the skills that make them feel magic.
That's really
What do you think?
interesting. Yeah, I agree. And I think that, as you say, this is where people, and you call this is where they get stuck, because they've moved up the ladder away from where they originally started and were using those skills on a daily basis. And then those skills get sort of evolve into different areas, as you say, into some more people management. At what point do people tend to recognize that they are stuck in their life?
Generally, it's an age thing. I think we as humans, somewhere between our 40s and 50s. Now, this is just generally speaking. There are some very evolved individuals who get this concept in their 20s or 30s, but mostly the people I see have this moment of reevaluation in their 40s or early-ish 50s. And I had one of those moments myself that lasted many years, where I had moved up the ladder. I used to love what I did. Immensely enjoyed it, but I had children, the world changed, we were in a recession, so work became very, very slowly less exciting, less interesting, less joyful, until the point that I felt that I was ebbing away from myself. And I woke up one morning after a very, very long day. So left, I don't know, pre-7 o'clock when the nanny arrived, came back 7 o'clock, handed over to the nanny, tried to get my two children into bed really quickly so I could continue work. And I just had a seat at the end of a very long day and decided that that wasn't the life that I wanted to live. It wasn't the lifestyle I wanted to live. It wasn't the kind of parent I wanted to be. It wasn't the kind of work that I wanted to do. I felt that I had some potential, but I hadn't got a clue where to point it. So I think I find that people that I talk to typically have is this it feeling, going through their mind for quite some time before they decide to do something about it.
And people call it, or they've called it, the sort of the midlife crisis, and you go out and you buy the Ferrari, or if you could, that's what sort of, or you maybe sort of change your partner because you think that's going to give the answer. So there's lots of big shifts that people make, thinking that that's going to be the answer, but actually, what is the real root of the issue here?
So one of the roots, that's very complicated, but one of the roots is that our old definition of success is no longer relevant to us. And so when I was having my waking up moment, my old definition of success was senior people management, decent house, nice car, nice holidays, etc. And that, was really, really one-dimensional. But it took me to my early 40s to decide to shift what success meant for me. And I didn't decide to shift it, I just redefined it more personally. So, and I think when individuals do that, the knock-on impacts become very obvious.
And you mentioned, so there's this necessary change that people need to make, and particularly the career is something that you focus on. Well, how does that sort of manifest in other areas of their life as well?
So if we are doing work 8 or 9 hours a day that is draining the life out of us or is stressful, so we're just not working with our superpowers, we're working outside of them, we're working in our weaknesses, we have to work very, very hard to keep going at a rate of success that we thought was necessary. So I mean, I see people burning out, I see stress, being way high, and all of this so that they can just earn the same money to have the big house, the big car, and it requires going inside rather than changing anything outside. So I think, a lot of people around that age group do suffer from stress. A lot of the individuals around that age group are also looking after older parents. They have children growing up, leaving. They have just a lot of change, a lot of responsibility, and not a lot of time for thinking. So I think that the work that I do starts with, okay, what have we got? What are the skills we've got to use? And what do we want? The question, what do we want, is one of the hardest questions in the world to answer if you're not really clear on what successful life means to you.
And it's funny that you say it's about what do people want, because they very clearly will tell you what they don't want.
Absolutely. I've seen people write it in lists, oh, that's easy, that'll take me 5 minutes. But the what do you want is much more complicated, much more interesting, and much more revealing.
And is it not just a case of just sort of changing the negatives into positives? So that
No.
if only it was as easy as that.
Okay, so let's take stress for an example. Yes. So I don't want this level of stress in my life. Okay, so what do you want? Less stress? But that doesn't make any sense. So what do you mean by, so you just have to come down much more. What do you mean by stress? How does stress impact you? Where does this stress start? Who is creating this stress? Is it in my mind, or is it someone around me that's creating this stress? And so once you go to the core level, then you realize what has to change.
And you mentioned that you were stuck for several years. What did you do to get out of that period of being stuck?
Yeah, this isn't one of my most impressive stories. So I understand this mentality, but I never advise this. Okay, so I think a couple of years of me just getting smaller and smaller, and still being a decent mum, still being a decent wife, but just feeling less important in the world. So what did I do to change that? So after that horrible day, and when I sat down and I decided it just cannot be the same in a year's time, I started seeking out inspiration, I think I'll call it. So I started to try and find people who'd changed careers and were happier. I started to, but I couldn't find anybody. I didn't know anybody who'd changed careers. Not one human being in my network had changed careers and were happier for it. Some had retrained and were less happy. And so I did a couple of different things. I sought inspiration through TED Talks. I'm sure you know TED Talks, but I used to, jump into bed exhausted and watch a few TED Talks and go to sleep happier. But I ended up not. I ended up basically signing up for a master's in psychology, and it was an escape, a clear escape route. It was not a planned, designed, engineered plan B. But in doing that, master's in psychology for a year, I spent lots of my savings doing that. And I also was a full-time mum for the first time in all my life. So it was a very, very stressful time and pushed everybody in our household to the edge. And at the end of that, so 12, 13, 14 months later, when I handed in my dissertation and I took a breath, I was knee-walkingly exhausted. I took a breath and thought, geez, career change cannot be this hard. And that's when I started to think, this is a problem that the world needs help on. And then I started a different kind of research project on people of my age and my generation and how they were designing happier work for themselves. But in that period, I still hadn't designed my career properly then. But what I decided to do was seek out people who had changed careers, who were professionals and had changed careers and decided to find themselves as happier because of that. And I did a couple of those and I loved it. These people were like me, but they'd done it differently. And then I gave myself a challenge to meet or interview 100 people who had changed careers after the age of 40 and defined themselves as happier because of it. And that's when my world opened up. That's when I understood that there were some patterns behind successful career change, and that there were patterns that I could share with individuals. And then I created Midlife Unstuck, which is my business that helps people to design careers that fit.
I think there's a couple of things there that are interesting. You said that nobody in your network had done anything to change their careers, and you were looking around and nobody was there. But it was when you then started to look for people out of your network that you said that the world opened up.
Yes. So one of the hindrances to people of my age doing different, or even just imagining different work, is that we can't see it. We haven't seen it. Because if we've been like me in a similar sort of environment for 20 years, different companies, but the same environment, our network is very small. So our peer group doesn't or isn't able to help us make the changes that we need. So that's why we often start reading books about whatever we're interested in, and watching TED Talks, and expanding our environment. Because once we do that, the possibilities expand for us. So once I've talked to 10 people who changed careers, I just knew there are millions of them out there. And my whole mindset shifted, and the possibilities were endless.
So how do you help the people now to design those careers that they really, really, truly want?
So we've got two parts. So the first is we go within, which is kind of what we've been talking about before. So we do a deep dive into their lovely midlife, what it is, and we discover their uniqueness. And often we rediscover their uniqueness because they've lost it somewhere along the way. Yeah. And they're comparing themselves with this tiny little network, when actually they need to be comparing themselves with the bigger world. Exactly, we've just explained. So we work on what's been hindering them and what can enable them. So what are their strengths? What are their superpowers? What's their kryptonite? So that's a really interesting one. So the kryptonite is the arenas or the environments or the people that we work with who drain the life out of us, or who bring stress to us, or bring excessive work to. So once you get clear on what you've got to offer the world that is magnificent, get clear on the way that you cannot offer this to the world, it all becomes much more optimistic. And then we move into the design phase, which is about understanding the problem of work, identifying all of the constraints. How much money do you need to earn to pay the mortgage? How many hours? Where do you need to work? What, some of the practical elements. And then we brainstorm. So I get all of my clients to, I help them, because it's kind of hard, to get 100 ideas of what they can do differently, which is a huge number, and no one has ever said they could do it, but they almost always do it. And then we narrow those down to 21, and then to 7, and then to 2, and then they create a prototype of their new career. Now, often, I've made that sound really simple, but often they have to keep doing their current career to pay the mortgage or to pay school fees or whatever. So often there's a dual approach. So they keep doing what they're doing, but they bring in their superpowers to their current work, which makes them less drained, less stressed, whilst they're creating this lovely plan B.
And interesting, I'm just going to pick up on how you reduce those numbers from 121 to 7 to 2 to 1. What are they? Why those numbers?
So 100 I chose randomly, because it's a huge number and it sounds impossible. But if you can get there or get close to there, the brain has changed the way it works. Yeah, so you're trying to see 100 possibilities, as opposed to what happens when we first begin that exercise. Oh no, I couldn't do that. I don't have those skills today. Oh no, that doesn't sound right. Yeah, so the possibilities become endless, and then we narrow it down by looking at a range of their personal fears, the problems that are exciting to them, and the solutions in the world that they like the sound of. Yeah, so we get down to 21 and 7 that way. And we get to 7 by just taking the impossible ones out. So one of my clients recently had this wild idea in his 100, and he wanted to become a dog groomer. Yeah, and what a marvelous, fun idea, but it was frivolous because he couldn't, it would never earn enough money to do to earn what he needs to earn to have his family life. So that idea went away. It didn't make it into the final 7, but it was in the final 21 because it was really exciting and fun. And then often it depends on their situations. I'd say 50-50. Often it's 50% want to tweak their work in a way that works better, because through the process that we've gone through, we actually realized the actual work isn't the problem, the environment or the values of the company, or there's something else that can be tweaked. So 50% of my clients do that. And the other 50 do some weird and wonderful things like gin companies or micro bakers or lots of other cool and interesting things.
Yeah, I read in your book Exchange about the gin lady, and I was like, oh, that sounds fantastic. What a great
So Kate, who owns the gin, it's called the Gin Kitchen,
kitchen.
with her partner. I mean, she is like the poster girl for amazing career change, because she did it with no money, like zero money. She did it in her spare time. She did it on her weekends. She's got 3 kids. When my clients talk to me about impossibility, I couldn't do that, or I can never do that, I just talk about her story, because it took a long time, but in less than a year, they were in Fortnum and Mason's Gin of the Month twice in less than a year. So we limit ourselves, we limit our possibility by saying we can't do something. And there are loads of stories in the book that show that it can be done in a million different ways.
Fantastic. And we're talking about kryptonite earlier, and can people have their own kryptonite within them as well as other people demonstrating that kryptonite?
Oh, this is a good question. I'll try to explain quickly. Of course, sometimes we are our own kryptonite, and it might be some limiting beliefs. It's often some limiting beliefs. I could never change. I could never go back to school. I could never stop doing what I'm doing, or I could never lead. I could never have my own business. So these are just ideas in our head. So I think often we blame others for these limiting beliefs when actually we're choosing to keep them going. So that often with some of my clients, there's just one dominant limiting belief that is getting in the way. And it's possible to change those relatively quickly once you've acknowledged them, accepted them, and changed, some of the language in our head.
And what if the people around us who we love dearly are the kryptonite to what we want to do?
So we call those the naysayers. So that's kind of difficult. If it's the people around us in one company, I think that's easier to change. If it's the partner who doesn't believe that we are capable of doing this or isn't supportive of it, or it's our children who want us to just be with them, most people, our human brains want us to stay in the same place all the time, because at the moment, there's no lion trying to eat us. Yeah. So change is difficult for that reason, for us as humans, but we do need to get our family on board to make the changes that we need to make. I'm not sure if that's totally answered your question. What do you think about that?
I agree. I think it's very hard if it's someone who is looking out for you is the way I see it. And it's just probably for me, I just explain from my perspective. It goes back to a brilliant analogy that I've heard once about a beach ball. Is imagine you're holding a beach ball between you and somebody else, and it's 6 colors on it, and you've got orange, yellow, and green on one side, and the other one's got the red, white, and blue. You're both seeing a beach ball, but you're just seeing different things, and you're talking about it in different ways, and you're describing it in different ways. So sometimes for me, it goes back to sort of seeking first to understand and then be understood, and just try and explain why it's important to you.
And I think you're absolutely right. But I think often we try to explain that before we've got it really clear in our mind.
Yeah.
And so therefore it comes out in a way that we're still thinking about it as we're speaking it. Whereas I think if it's really clear in our minds, it's much more easily communicated.
It's quite funny because I call myself a midlife beginner. So I have done several things in midlife, and I started out getting very excited about what I was going to do and sort of telling people. And then the responses from others were like, oh, no, that's not going to work. No, it doesn't work anymore, what you're thinking of doing. And especially in property. And I then just said, you know what, I'm just going to go quiet and I'm just going to do it. And then the results will just prove that I can. And it does happen. And things did happen. And then again, with the podcast and just getting bigger and becoming more for myself has made so much difference. But I just did it in my own way and just ignored other people.
Look, there will be the same number of people. If you talk to different people, they would say, go, Amy, you've got it. And then there will be another group that say this won't work. And ultimately, again, it comes back to, as it sounds as if you were very clear in your head, this is going to work, I'm going to try it. But also it seems as if you have a lovely experimental mindset. So a midlife beginner would suggest that you're always beginning different things. And you've had so many successes in midlife. I think that experimental mindset is something that doesn't feel very safe when you do it for the first time. And so the naysayers don't have an experimental mindset. But I definitely think that people like you and people like me who are changing the way we work and changing the world of work for us, we have to choose our peers, and that's unlikely to be the people who are the naysayers.
Yeah, actually, it's also really good to have that balanced approach as well in hearing some criticism, because it can't just always be full on positivity.
Totally. Oh God, nobody needs a cheerleader who's not telling the truth, But you could say, I love the idea. I've got some concerns about it. Do you want to hear them? And then I'm very receptive to that kind of naysaying.
So what would have happened if you hadn't have had that day where you decided, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to escape into psychology. I'm going to watch more TED Talks. I'm going to move on from this career I'm feeling very stuck in. What would be happening right now for you?
I would definitely be stuck in the same place, probably heading towards being 50-year-old corporate toast, which is my most read article on my website. So 50-year-old corporate toast is, I have a very strong belief that in corporations, when I looked at my FTSE 250 corporation, there were 2 people over the age of 50. And this was a really clarifying moment. And I think I was 43-ish at the time when I left. And I just thought, I'm not going to be that. Those people were very good at what their job, they're very, very good at what they did, but they had no longevity and no control over their career. So if I hadn't done what I'd done, I actually dread to think what my life would be like. I might still look as if I was successful from the outside, but I would have been pretty empty inside. And I don't mean to be over dramatic, but work for my generation is a crucial part of our self-esteem and our self-worth. And when I was doing work that didn't really matter as much as it could or did, I felt very small. And I dread to think what another 2 years or another 5 years of that would have felt like.
And you spoke earlier about the importance of life satisfaction being happiness.
Mm-hmm.
How satisfied and fulfilled are you in your work now?
So I have a little, I'll show you it here, but I have my 6 superpowers written in my office in front of my screen. And every day, I used to, until it became a habit, I used to put a number, like a percentage, what percentage of my day have I used these superpowers? And now I've evolved it to around 65% of every day I'm using those superpowers. And I'm a small business, it's just me. So there's bound to be things that I'm doing that I'm not, there are definitely things that I'm doing that I'm not very good at. But as I get bigger, I will outsource more of those things that I'm not very good at so that I can spend more and more time. So 65, I'd say, is my average, and I'm dead happy with that.
And why is it important for you to be working with people, helping them to design their careers?
Well, I feel as though if I can have an impact on a couple of hours of someone's working day, to show them how they can control the work that they do in a different way and do work that feels deep in their belly satisfying, I'm changing the world one person at a time. So, and if they can do that for 7 hours a day, they are then taking home a more energized, less drained, less stressed person. And that then impacts the rest of their life.
So, in a way, you have always helped people change their careers, no matter throughout your entire life work. Was it something that you planned, or did you fall into recruitment?
Oh dear. Okay, you took me there. No. I totally fell into it. So I was a very, very poor student, and I was applying for all sorts of jobs in big companies because that's what we did then. No one ever really worked for small companies straight out of university. I had debt up to my eyeballs, and I saw this ad in one of the university papers, and it said earn 25 grand in your first year. I didn't care what that job was going to do. I was going to do it. And I went through the graduate program, and I'm very embarrassed by this, but I still on day one didn't understand what recruitment was. Not a clue. And then spent 20 years doing it. So, and I think, sometimes, sometimes we fall into careers, and because we're grafters and smart enough, we get really good at them. But that doesn't mean they're the right careers for us.
So, can you adapt your superpowers to any career, or do you need to find the right career for your superpowers?
Ooh. Your superpowers are to do with you as a human. You can point them at any super problem you want to point them at. So, for instance, one of my superpowers is, pick one, reading and interpreting patterns in human behavior where others can't. Okay, so I've used that all of my career. I use it in my friendships. This is so, I could analyze applications from 400 finance directors down to 10 in, I don't know, 5 hours. I could interview 10 of those, and their human behavior would tell me that they would culturally fit with a certain business or a certain person. And now I'm just doing that one-to-one, which is uber satisfying for me. So I'm just doing it one-to-one and sort of cracking open some of those patterns in human behavior. I also did it in my book. So interview 100 people, try to find the patterns. So I have this sort of scientific view of human behavior that led me to psychology. So you can see there are threads of it everywhere.
And was that learned, or do you think that was instinctive?
Nature, nurture, nature, nurture. I think it was learned. I think so. I'm the only girl in a family of 3, and I'm a communicator. They weren't, so I had to. I think it's mostly learned. So, and that's why I'm really optimistic that there are some superpowers that I haven't even discovered yet that are going to change my life in the future. So I have definitely practiced all of my superpowers that I've discovered so far in life. But for instance, that experimental mindset that you and I both have, I give myself a challenge every year. When I started to slip down into this unhappiness, I decided to give myself a challenge that year to climb 2 Alps in 12 hours. Actually, it was climb 3. I didn't make the 3, but I climbed 2 Alps in 12 hours. Then the next year I thought, well, I'm going to cycle around the Isle of Wight in a basket bike. And the next year, so anyway, last year I was going to swim a mile in a lake in the UK. So I did that in the Serpentine, and I have discovered something. I think it's super. I don't know. I can't articulate the words, but by experimenting, I'm creating opportunities to find new superpowers. So I think I'm going to be 80, still learning some new superpowers.
And people at home, they might be thinking, "Oh, I don't know what my superpower is." Give it another example so that people can understand what a superpower looks like.
Okay, so Kate, the poster girl for career change in our 40s, the lady who co-owns the gin kitchen. So one of her superpowers is, I won't get the language quite right, but it's something to do with making things better, making technical things better. So in her career as a defense exec, her role was innovation. Okay. So then in her weekends, she started to innovate, to create what she and her partner believe as the best gin in the world, or the finest gin in the world. I don't know if they think they've got there yet, but they innovated, changed, I mean, hundreds of different iterations of gin cocktails. They tested them. So she's a perfect example of using her superpower, but pointing them in two different ways. I think she also points that superpower at her family. So she's trying to get it was her son, I think she said, to understand entrepreneurial activities. And so she does this in innovative ways.
I love it. It's fantastic. It's such a great concept. And I think everybody could benefit from exploring their superpowers a bit more. Well, no, not a bit more, loads
A
more.
lot more.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
really, really confidence inducing. So that's probably the feedback I get most is that this is really clear, really understandable. And boy, does it feel great to be great at 5 different things, like great, better than most people in your network.
So finally, after all of these years of searching and changing, you now feel that you're maturing in life.
Yeah, I am definitely doing work that matters. It matters to me. It matters to my family. So probably about a year ago, my elder daughter, who was about 11, I think at the time, she drew on my whiteboard in my office a picture of a Cheshire cat, and she wrote below it, "Mummy, my mummy makes people happy." Oh my God, I loved it.
That's fabulous.
So I do believe I'm doing work that matters.
And if you continued to live on autopilot, it would be a very different world.
Yeah, again, I dread to think. I hardly ever go there to imagine what that would have been like. So you're prompting me to think in a totally different way here. But I dread to think. I think I probably would have worked for one of the competitors that I was talking to at the time, but I would have taken the same problems to a different place.
So for those people who are out there and they're at this natural point of reflection, what would you sort of recommend that they do?
So I would recommend they take an A4 sheet of paper, write the word success on it, and define it. I would then, on that same piece of paper, write down their kryptonite. So the people, the environments, the situations, the industry, maybe, I'm not sure, but the things that drain the life out of them. Yeah. And write those down clearly. And then I would start to think about superpowers. And, on my website, there's millions of articles on how to start doing that. Those are the 3 things I would start with.
Fantastic. So that leads on nicely to saying thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today, Lucia. It's been amazing. People can obviously reach out to you via website. How else can they get hold of you?
Oh, LinkedIn is probably the easiest place to get hold of me.
Perfect. I'll put that into the show notes. And thank you. It's been incredible taking us through all sorts of superpowers. I love it. I feel very empowered. In fact, I'm going to go and start looking at my superpowers in more depth today because I think it's a great exercise and we should all be doing this. Why not?
Well, if you need any help, you've got plenty of they're oozing out of your pores, Amy. So I don't think that will be a difficult exercise for you, but it's been great.
You say that, but I think other people can see yours easier than sometimes you see them themselves. Do you recognize that?
So on your A4 piece of paper, ask your partner, kids, cousins, sisters, whatever, what they think you do better than most people. That'll help.
Fantastic. Final message to the audience, please, Lucia.
So final message will be no surprise to you, but I believe that our lives are filled with infinite potential. And we can start to release that potential as soon as we turn off autopilot.
Thank you for listening to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson, and if you've enjoyed this episode, please leave me a 5-star Apple Podcast review. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, and become a member of my inspiring, uplifting, and positive Focus on Why Facebook group. I help people to focus on their why with clarity, uniting their passion with their purpose with a plan to create the life they truly desire. If you would like me to help you focus on your why, then please book a free 20-minute coaching call via calendly.com/Amy Rowlandson. And if you haven't already, please sign up for the Friday Focus weekly newsletter via my website, amyrowlinson.com. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.